This is the Court Leader's Advantage, a podcast series for court professionals and by court professionals. Brought to you by thecourtleader.net and in cooperation with NACM, the National Association for Court Management. As one progresses higher in an organization, the challenges of leadership can become a regular test. Increasingly responsible positions can draw leaders away from the very people they first came to rely on. The demands of those you report to can outweigh the needs of the people who support you. How do you keep grounded with the people who depend upon you for leadership? And what happens when things do not go well? Not every plan succeeds. How do you lead when the court must close down a project or endeavor because it is not achieving the expected results? Finally, great leaders are intuitive. They possess the emotional intelligence necessary to provide staff with the motivation they need to continue working toward the organization's mission. What part does emotional intelligence play in leadership? I'm Pete Kiefer, and welcome to the Court Leader's Advantage podcast series. This month, we're looking at leadership in the courts, keeping in touch with staff, leading when a plan is not successful, and the role of emotional intelligence. Once again, here to discuss these questions are Stacy Fields, Court Administrator for the Municipal Court in Crestwood, Missouri; Katie Hemphill, Office Administrator for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit in Washington, D.C.; Lizzie Alipez, Clerk of Court for the Municipal Court in Tinmouth, Colorado; Janet Cornell, Consultant and Retired Court Administrator; and Rick Pierce, Judicial Programs Administrator for the Pennsylvania Administrative Office of the Courts. Thank you all for joining today's podcast. Now, being in leadership can place one in rarefied air. Endless meetings, reports, presentations, keeping up with new laws, policies, and contracts. It's very easy to lose touch with line staff and their perspective. Has that ever been a danger for you, and how do you work to prevent it? Katie?
So yeah, I agree. It can be really easy to get caught up in all of the things you've got going on in your day-to-day, and you can miss out on things going on with your staff, like things if they're struggling with some part of their role or what may be happening with the office climate. So in a previous leadership position that I had monthly check-ins with each of my staff just to see how things were going in their role, and also have those conversations about what may be going in their life that may be affecting them in the workplace, just to get a better understanding and to know how I could best support them. In my current office, all supervisors have regular check-ins with their staff. Usually on a weekly basis, they have just little quick check-ins. And then on a quarterly basis, we have the opportunity for all staff to sign up for a one-on-one meeting with our chief deputy clerk to bring up any issues, in the broader office that they may want to discuss. And twice a year, we send out office climate surveys. And there's an opportunity on there to also give anonymous feedback. And this will help ensure that everyone has a chance to have their voice heard in whatever capacity they feel comfortable with.
Stacy?
I echo that. I feel as a leader, like it's very important to be relational and not just about assignment or necessarily duties, but just to check to make sure of the temperature, what's going on, how something is impacting another person, so that they have an opportunity to know, one, that I'm available, approachable, and that they can connect easy. So we're not handling severe crisis because we're kind of taking things each way. And personally, for me, it helps for me to do that check-in, because sometimes you can get caught up in someone else's urgent. When you have meetings and you have a lot of things going on, it gives me a chance to step away and reflect and realize the importance of who I'm serving, because I'm not just serving the public, I'm also serving the staff, or whoever I'm working with on a team. I'm serving them as well. So I want to make sure, that they're okay in their job function and they're well equipped. So it works both ways. For me, checking in helps me to remember the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Peter, I'd like to chime in and add to that the importance of being visible and finding different creative ways to be visible. Maybe it's, as I used to practice, making sure I was at work early with the entire crew and making sure they saw me there instead of doing executive late arrival hours. The use of meetings, as Stacy already mentioned, check-in times, and the two-way communication. And so that means continuing to be creative to be visible.
Now, sometimes a project just doesn't work out, and a court must either give up the effort or try some new approach. Have you ever been involved in a project that had to be closed down? And what is the leader's role in a project that does not work out? Rick?
Well, yes, I have been involved in a project like that. And I think the leader's role, first and foremost, is take the responsibility and shoulder the blame. That seems kind of obvious, but it's easier to say than it is to do, because none of us like blame or being culpable for an action. We all like to claim that we're accountable, but when we're actually held to it, it burns sometimes. I'd say leaders have to provide alternatives too, even if that means kind of returning to the status quo. We did that here in my court in Pennsylvania. We had a statewide case management system that we were implementing in criminal cases it was a mandate rollout to, and the offices that were particularly being affected were the filing office holders for criminal cases, which are called clerks of court in Pennsylvania. And the clerks are an elected official in the vast majority of the courts. They're elected, and not all, but the vast majority of them. And they were resistant to change, like most people are kind of resistant to change to begin with. And then some of the interfaces that we had just did not go well with what they already had and did not mesh with their legacy systems. And so we had some significant issues there that we had to actually, because of significant backlash and not only just from public relations perspective, but just from a functionality, we really had to take a pause. So we paused it for 6 months, and then we made the fix and rolled it back out. And what it enabled us to do, I mean, my role during that pause and the eventual second time rollout was really to go out there and be the cheerleader and for the courts, for the district courts, and for the clerk of courts offices to meet with them and to kind of encourage them and say, hey, look, we've made these changes, give it a shot now, give it a try. And if you still have issues, come see us. If you don't, then be a supporter to the next county that we go see. And it worked. We had to establish a credibility issue. Sounds kind of simple, but in a sense that I think the biggest change and the biggest challenge was actually admitting that it was not working, putting a pause to it, but not throwing it and not shutting it down completely and throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. We had another one where, now that was a mandated issue. We had another situation where we had instituted a centralized jury management list where we were bringing in many sources from the state agencies to provide us to come up with one master list for each county to access through our database. We had some issues there as well. Some of them were internal and some of them were external. Some of them were out of our control. But what made this project, and it's been successful as well, but slowly gaining credibility, is the fact that this was not a mandated issue. This was something that the courts could opt into and volunteer. But here again, these are things that you constantly have to re-examine why things are failing and rectify them, but do it in a manner where you're transparent and that you are doing everything you can to establish credibility, but also being accountable as well.
Janet?
And yes, I too have been involved in a project that had to be halted. The project I'm thinking about was implementing differentiated case flow management techniques in a family court operation. And during the ramp up phase, we spent months pulling data, reviewing files, evaluating steps that would be used for the DCM program. I mean, months. Ultimately, it was not rolled out. We chose that we could not make it work. What did I take from that? Well, we learned a lot through the study of the cases and the statistics and evaluating the events. We really did learn a lot. And so we could apply that to ongoing case flow handling, even though we didn't proceed with that particular program. It reminds me again of the importance of the accountability and communicating and being clear on goals. And being the eternal optimist, I think it informed us to be that much better aware of that particular caseload as a result of that, where we had spent the time and the energy, and yet it did not commence.
I just wanted to add just something that our office does at the end of any project, whether it's successful or not. We conduct an after action review, and we have someone to lead that who was not part of the project so that they can be objective and also ask the right questions. And all of those are recorded so that we have those takeaways for the next time we want to start a project, and what did we learn from that. And I think, what Janet says is really important. What did you learn from the experience? And we like to make sure that that's documented for, whoever wants to lead a project in the future.
How is it documented?
So the after action review, once it's conducted, that's drafted into a report that's shared with all the participants so they can make any edits that they want. And once it's finalized, we store them all in one shared section of our SharePoint site. So that you can go in and anybody can have a look at those and see, what the main takeaways were from any project.
Emotional intelligence is an important trait of an effective leader. Can you define emotional intelligence for me? And give me a time when you used it in your leadership role. Lizzie?
I understand emotional intelligence as the ability to understand and manage my own emotions, and as well as recognizing and understanding other people's emotions and perspectives. I will steal or borrow Rick's connect. I think that will be another way to express it. Like, you have to connect with certain people, with everyone, to understand their emotions, to communicate your emotions, and be able to put yourself in that person's shoes in any aspect of your life, either being the defendant, being the judge, being the supervisor, being yourself, that has to understand what's going on around you and see those perspectives and emotions as something that you can connect with. I think that doing that for a leader helps develop that positive work culture, which can increase efficiency and productivity in whatever line of work you are working in. I think it motivates people when they know they're connected, they're understood, and that people know what they're going through. It helps them give their best, and it aids into making the right decisions in difficult times. I think I've tried to do that not only in the line I work now, but in any part of I've been working and in life itself, to try to use that emotional intelligence, as I understand it, to help others to thrive, to get the best solution, and to know, to let people know that their opinions matter and they're heard. So in a leadership role, I have the chance to had, not now in court, but when I was working in nonprofit organization, that's when I had to try to make people understand why certain cultural differences happen, and how to develop an understanding to help those differences be a minimum.
Rick?
Part of me says emotional intelligence is a term that I'm glad that we use now, because I think it helps those at the very top understand and say, okay, there's something more to this, and it's not just being some type of soft sympathy that we offer to our staff or whomever. No, there's a strategy here of actually making sure that we engage everyone in our organization if we want to succeed. To me, there's nothing more important in leading a multi-generational workforce than connecting with each person you touch, be it an employee, a direct report, a core customer, or your own supervisor. Because I think if we actually do connect with them, then there's the opportunity to resolve many of those issues that would come before us. You know, my goal every day, I'm not saying I succeed in doing this, but my goal every day is how can I be the best team player while exhibiting my leadership capabilities? And yeah, there are days when I probably get up and I don't ask myself that question, and I should. And my other second question is, how can I assist others reach their potential? So yeah, sometimes I do fail to live up to my expectations or maybe the expectations of others. But I do think we cannot underestimate this power of connection, or the power of emotional intelligence. But what it does do that many leaders poo-poo the whole principle is it requires people to be vulnerable. And many don't want to take that risk because, you know, that means that you could be seen as, whether it's soft or weak, could be seen as, inadequate, but that's not true. And then we have this concern too. Well, we can't necessarily feel or being connected with our employees, but we must remain detached. Well, there's always going to be some type of attachment. Yes, you don't always have to be best friends with everybody that comes to work, even though some people that do come to work do want to be friends with the people they work with. Because the concern is, well, what if we have to discipline them or tell them that they no to a particular promotion or even no to a request for leave? But I think it's much easier to give and to receive negative news when you have a strong, trusting relationship than you do when there's just a disconnect.
Stacy?
Well, I define emotional intelligence as the wisdom and sensitivity to be able to control your own emotions and being mindful of others. And I think it's a fine balance. And I like, Rick, how you mentioned that it's a generational workforce. And there is, to me, in this, the generation that's involved in the workforce now, because of the advancement of technologies and those type of things, it's been a broader difference in how certain things are handled. And I think that we have to be mindful of how some people process their emotions and how they bring that to work and how they choose to serve in their position. And then as leaders, kind of navigating those waters. I actually worked with someone who emotionally was very unstable. When that person was a solid worker, they were a solid worker, but there were times when there would be like emotional breakdowns and those kind of things. So we had to think a little bit differently about assigning tasks. We had to think a little bit differently about the weight that they carried in their position, and walk a fine line between offering them the resources that they needed to help them to develop their emotional intelligence and, the concern that we have for them as, as a person in general. So I think that emotional intelligence is important, and it is something that we have to be mindful of because we have so many alternate ways that people are translating their emotions now. So we have to be careful on how we navigate that in kind of the parameters that we set up on how we deal with that, so that we're effective, but also sensitive to the needs, of the team that we're working with.
Recapping everything that Rick said and Stacy, I think emotional intelligence, the way we all express it, we understand, it's what builds trust in the end and helps you also with that trust be a better leader that can have a better insight into your team. And even if there's some difficulties that you have to encounter, like we mentioned before, maybe you have to discipline someone, but when that connection, again, going to Rick's perfect word, going to that connection, it makes it easier because you have built that trust already.
Finally, is there a leadership trait that you think stands out above all the others? Lizzie?
I'll go back and repeat the honesty and authentic part of it. I think that can program and group many other characteristics, but for me it would be being honest and authentic.
Katie?
I would say for me personally, the most important trait of a leader is development. And what I mean by that is kind of coaching your staff, guiding your staff, encouraging them to develop themselves. And then, as we've kind of talked about throughout our discussion today, empowering them and trusting them to make their own decisions. In the 5 levels of leadership by, I think it's John C. Maxwell, he talks about how the highest level of leadership is the pinnacle, and that's where you're creating a generation of leaders to come after you. And so I think that for me, developing your people is one of the best traits of leadership.
Stacy?
I think one of the best traits of a leader is humility. And I think the more responsibility that you've given and the more perceived power that you have, the more important it is to remember it as serving others and not others serving you, because really humility connects you with where you came from and where you're going. And what it allows is that it doesn't make you weak. What it lets you know is that you are aware of the power that you carry, or you're aware of the influence that you carry, and you keep a mindset to serve others, because then when you have that next generation that's following you in leadership, that they will remember that as well. And I think, Rick, you also mentioned, like, you check your ego at the door. This allows you to be able to stay connected to the people that you're working with and who's working for you, as well as allowing you to walk through the door of additional, maybe levels, of promotion, because you are willing, to serve others and to remember that. And then that also helps you to be able to be a good role model for others who are following, after you.
Janet?
I'm going to bend the rules and offer 2 things that come to mind, because they're both so important in my experience. The first is quiet competence. I think good leaders are ones that are very competent, but they are not boasting or bragging about it. And the second thing that occurs to me is to know yourself. Know what your strengths are. Know what your weaknesses are. Know when you need help. Know, in my instance, when I need help being motivated or expanding empathy for others. To know yourself.
Rick?
There's a lot of wonderful points there. If you're watching this podcast, I suggest you just rewind it another 3 or 4 minutes to get it, if you missed anything that was added by Lizzie, Katie, Stacy, and Janet, because I think they were just outstanding points. But some of it's what I'm going to say is a repeat. I think leadership first and foremost starts with quality of character. I think if you don't have the quality of character, you can't lead. So you have to have that to start. And to me, that will probably stand out. But I also go back to some of the other things we've said earlier, the ability and desire to connect with each person, and realizing, as Stacy said, that it's not about you, but it's about them and those that you serve. And then the last thing I'll say is that, regarding leadership and management and how this all revolves into some extent, quality character being at the core of it. I look to our management guru, Warren Bennis, who said, managers do things right, but leaders do the right thing.
I want to thank Lizzie Alipez, Katie Hemphill, Stacy Fields, Janet Cornell, and Rick Pierce for sharing with us their knowledge, their insights, and their guidance on keeping in touch with your staff, leading when things do not go as planned, and the role of emotional intelligence. Their advice to us is invaluable. As always, my thanks to you, court professionals, tuning in to today's episode. Your vision and leadership is at the foundation of the court's mission. Thank you. Join us on Tuesday, August 21st, for another episode dealing with the issues facing our courts. This has been the Court Leaders Advantage podcast series. I'm Pete Kiefer, and thanks for joining us today. Thanks for joining us today. The Court Leaders Advantage is a regular podcast on courts and court administration. Today's episode will be available on our website, on YouTube, on Facebook, on iTunes, on LinkedIn, and on Twitter. Become part of the conversation. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, email us. Our address is CLApodcast, that's all one word, @nacomnet.org. Did you hear an interesting comment by one of the panelists that you would like to listen to again, but you don't want to search through the entire episode to find it? The Additional Resources section of the webpage contains a question time marker sheet. Just find the discussion question on the sheet, and next to it is the time that question was asked. You can then quickly fast forward to that time in the episode and listen to the panelists' comments. Remember, if you don't have time to watch an episode, you can always listen to the audio version. Listen in your car or on the bus on your way to or from work. You never have to miss an episode. I'm Pete Kiefer, and on behalf of our guests, the Court Leader website, and the National Association for Court Management, thank you, and have a great day. The views, information, and opinions expressed during this episode are solely those of the host and the individual presenters. They do not necessarily represent the position of the National Association for Court Management.